wind had a way of whispering through dry cedar, catching on the loose boards of a saloon and sighing down the dust-choked main road like it carried secrets from one porch to another. The town looked like it had been carved out of the red dust and left to dry under the weight of the sun. One saloon, one church, a jailhouse with rusted bars, and a general store that sold more hard liquor than flour. Beyond the last house, the land opened into wide, cracked plains that stretched to the red canyons, walls of stone that caught fire when the sun dipped low. Cora Belle stood barefoot on the porch of her ranch house, sweat glistening at her temple despite the gathering clouds. Her hands were calloused, strong from splitting wood and driving nails, but her eyes held a shine no desert could dull. Sharp, clear, and tired, she watched the horizon, the wind carrying the scent of rain and something darker trouble. 3 years had passed since the night her husband, Levi, bled out on that porch, shot in the gut by roadmen for refusing to hand over the payroll he'd been hauling. He'd crawled to the front steps, pressing one hand against the wound and the other around the neck of a trembling horse, whispering, "Take care of her." The mare Junebug had been the last thing he gave her. Not a ring, not a will, just that wild-eyed, honey-brown Mustang with the white star on her nose. Junebug had grown older with Cora, more careful, more loyal. She was the only living thing Cora talked to at the end of each day. That night, the thunder came in low and heavy, rattling the panes like a drunk knocking to be let in. The storm came suddenly, the air torn by white lightning that lit the pastures in brief, silent photographs. Junebug stirred in the corral, restless, pacing near the fence. Cora stepped out with a lantern, tightening the shawl over her shoulders. That's when she saw them, 3 riders, shadows riding low and fast across the ridge. Their horses wore red handprints smeared on their flanks like war paint. Blood River Gang. Cora had heard of them, outlaws who stripped towns bare and left witnesses in the dirt. She ducked instinctively, the lantern swinging, heart climbing into her throat. Junebug screamed, an animal cry split by fear, and Cora ran for the barn, slipping in the mud. By the time she got there, the corral was empty, the gate wide open, hoof prints gouged deep in the wet ground. They were gone. Junebug was gone. She stood there in the rain, fists clenched, the storm soaking her through. Her husband was buried under a cedar cross 30 yards behind the house. She whispered, "They took her, Levi." Like maybe the dead still listened. At dawn, she saddled her mule and rode to the edge of the next property, where Boaz McCall lived in a half-collapsed shack with 2 shotguns and 1 eye. He was out on the porch cleaning a rifle that hadn't been fired since the Battle of Franklin. "They took Junebug," Cora said. He looked up without blinking. "Who?" "Blood River Gang." Boaz cursed under his breath. "You going after him? I'll ride into town first." He wiped his hands and shook his head. "Ain't no law there, Cora. That sheriff don't piss unless the mayor says he can." She turned her mule. "Then I'll find someone who will." Dry cedar looked even smaller in the morning light. The sun caught the dust in low streaks, hanging like smoke. Children were already sweeping porches. A man shoveled dung from in front of a saloon, and the sheriff's office sat crookedly on the north corner. The door always opened because the hinges were rusted that way. Cora walked in, her boots leaving damp prints. Sheriff Tilson sat with his feet up, hat low over his face, a cup of black coffee gone cold in his hand. He squinted at her, then sat up straight when he saw the fire in her eyes. "Cora, morning. They took my horse," she said. "Last night. 3 of 'em. Blood River Gang. Came straight onto my land." He stood, scratching his jaw. "Now hold on, you sure it was them?" She didn't blink. "I saw the red marks. I saw their horses." "Well," he said slowly, picking his words like they were too heavy to lift. I'm real sorry to hear that. But a woman riding out after them, look, maybe you can put in a claim and... They stole her. You're the law." He spread his hands like a preacher trying to calm a fire. "They're killers, Cora. You want me to send one deputy to get himself shot for a horse?" She didn't speak, just stared. He looked away first. That's when the door creaked, and a figure stepped into the doorway. Tall, long coat trailing behind him, boots caked in red clay. His beard was thick and gray, but his back was straight like a rifle barrel. He didn't say a word, just stood there listening, his eyes, pale as river ice, tracking from Cora to the sheriff and back. Sheriff Tilson nodded awkwardly. "Morning, mister. You need something." The man said nothing. After a moment, he walked past Cora without a glance and tied his horse outside. She followed him with her eyes. He moved like he'd been in too many fights to flinch anymore. Outside, the street had grown quiet. She stepped out after him, dust kicking up around her hem. He was saddling up, tightening the strap slowly. "You heard me," she said. He kept his eyes on the saddle. She stepped closer. "You gonna say anything?" He looked up, squinting slightly at the horizon. Then his eyes found hers. "Ma'am," he said in a voice low as thunder on the mesa, "I'll get your horse back." Cora stared at him. She almost laughed. "You don't even know my name." He swung into the saddle. "Don't need to." She took a step back, arms folded. "You a bounty hunter?" "No, ma'am. Ranger. Used to be." She hesitated. "Then why help me?" He gave a faint shrug. "Can't ride past something like that." The wind shifted just then, blowing the coat aside, and she saw it. A long rifle slung across his back, worn smooth at the grip. Not for show. That was a gun that had done its work in the dark. She watched him ride toward the canyon line until the dust swallowed him. Behind her, the sheriff stepped out and lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. "You know who that is?" he asked softly. Cora didn't turn. "No," she said. "But they will." The sky opened wide as Elias rode, the horizon yawning in every direction, carved by wind and time into brittle earth and sandstone teeth. His horse moved at a patient gait, deliberate and quiet as its rider, hoofbeats muffled by the powder-dry soil. The sun hung high but offered no warmth, just heat, hard and merciless. Out here, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was watchful. Elias leaned from the saddle, fingers brushing a tangle of crushed mesquite. The branch was snapped at an odd angle. He dismounted, boots crunching the dry ground, and crouched beside it. A fresh print, not deep but clean. Quarter horse. He scanned ahead, saw the faint arc of hoof marks where the rider had turned north. Red dust was disturbed in a wide arc, fast movement. Panic. He touched the ground, feeling for heat, but it had long since cooled. A few feet ahead, a single droplet of blood clung to the edge of a cactus thorn, drying at its edge. Elias stood and adjusted the brim of his hat, eyes narrowing under the sun. He was close. The trail had led him through broken washes and dead riverbeds, under hawk shadow and the scent of creosote. A rattler hissed from beneath a rock outcrop, and Elias moved around it without pause. Nothing startled him, not anymore. The only thing that raised his pulse was memory. El Paso. The screams had echoed through the canyon for hours, gunfire lighting the night like fireworks on the 4th. He and 10 others had ridden in under false orders, thinking they were pulling hostiles off a train line. They'd found women and children instead. Half his unit shot blindly, drunk on fear. The others followed orders. Elias hadn't. He'd shot his own captain through the back. He buried the others and walked out of that canyon alone. That was the last time he wore a badge. Now he followed tracks not for a paycheck or a marshal star, but because something in him couldn't bear the sound of a woman's voice breaking. Not again. Not after the widow's eyes locked onto his like she already knew how it would end. He'd ridden through dusk, crossed a creek that reeked of urine and old blood, then saw the smoke. Low. Controlled. Men who knew better than to build big fires in dangerous country. He tethered his horse in a gulch and went forward on foot. The Blood River gangs camped squatted against the side of a sandstone bluff, half hidden by brush. 7 men, maybe 8. One fire. Their laughter broke the stillness like gunshots. A young settler boy, barely older than 16, was tied to a post, face bruised and raw. One outlaw struck him across the mouth with the back of a hand, then took a swig from a shared flask. Another held Junebug's reins loosely, dragging her around the camp like a trophy. She bucked and resisted, hooves kicking at the dirt. "She's too pretty for that widow." A man sneered. "Maybe we keep her. Give her a proper rider." They laughed. Cord Wilkes sat slightly apart, carving a piece of jerky with a long knife. His coat was cavalry issue, sleeves torn at the elbows. He had the look of a man who'd seen the inside of too many battles and decided mercy was for children. "Best get shut of her soon," he said, not looking up. "Too many eyes on pretty horses." "But boss," said the drunk one, "we just—" Wilkes flung the knife with a casual flick. It landed an inch from the drunk's foot. "Don't make me repeat myself." The man shut up. Wilkes stood and walked over to Junebug, placing a rough hand on her neck. She reared slightly, but he didn't flinch. "Animals can sense things," he said softly. "She knows who owns her now." Elias watched from the ridge above, silent as the stars. The rage in his chest didn't flare. It condensed, slow and cold, the way a glacier crushes stone. He turned and slipped back into the canyon's darkness. That night, the wind howled through the stones. At dawn, the gang found one of their own missing, Jeb, the scout. His bedroll was empty. His rifle leaned against a rock, untouched. Cord gave no speech, just spat into the dust and said, "He ran." The next night, it was another Lance, the card player. Gone. Wilkes' hand twitched at his side as he reached for his holster, eyes scanning the dark beyond the firelight. Something was wrong. They doubled watches, drank less, talked less. Then came the third night. A scream tore through the canyon, sharp and wet. They found Luke hanging upside down from a mesquite tree half a mile out, his boots missing, eyes wide with terror. A note was pinned to his vest with a knife. Blood had soaked the paper, but the words still showed through in hard, ink-scratched letters. "Return what ain't yours." Cord tore it free and crushed it in his fist. Behind him, the others stood in a semicircle, guns drawn but pointed at nothing. "We move camp," Wilkes said, voice clipped. "We ride out in 2 hours. Leave the fire cold." "But the horse?" "She stays." Junebug stood tethered to a tree, eyes wild. Cord met her gaze. Something in the animal's defiance unsettled him. That night, the fire was smaller. The men took turns sleeping in short shifts. The settler boy was gone, vanished, ropes cut, no prints in the dirt. The men whispered now. About ghosts. About the devil riding the ridgeline. About a man they'd seen once, long ago, whose eyes looked through you like glass. Wilkes sat silent, carving again, but his hand shook. Elias waited above, rifle across his knees. He watched every movement, every flinch. He didn't need to rush. Fear was a weapon, too. He remembered once being told that justice had to wear a badge to count. But that had been before El Paso, before the screams. Now he believed in a different kind of justice, the kind that moved slow and quiet, and left its marks in blood. Down below, the camp went still. Wilkes stared into the dark, listening. Elias didn't blink. He was just getting started. The sky had lost its mercy. It was a flat sheet of pale heat, stretching from canyon wall to canyon wall, the kind of sky that made even the shadows squint. Cora Bell stood in the doorway of her barn, the barrel of her late husband's Sharps rifle resting across her lap. She had oiled it that morning, polished the stock until her reflection winked back at her, older, sharper. A woman remade by grief and hardened by years spent alone. Dry Cedar offered her nothing. No law, no help. Only frightened men with badges and words that crumbled the moment they touched her ears. So she packed flour, coffee, jerky, and bullets, saddled the mule, strapped the rifle tight, and rode into the canyons with only the creak of leather and the steady thump of hooves as company. She followed where instinct led her, but it wasn't instinct alone. Her husband had taught her how to read sign, how to look for the faint imprints most eyes missed. And he had taught her one thing more important than any of that. When you want something, ride straight and don't flinch. The mule picked its way along a dry riverbed littered with smooth stones and animal bones. Overhead, a hawk cried once and vanished. She passed an old mesquite tree with fresh bark torn low, the kind of wound made by a passing horse, not a wild one. Cora dismounted and studied the earth. A faint arc of boot tracks led off behind a rise, one print deeper than the other, a man carrying weight. Her heart clenched. She pressed on, rising into narrow ridges carved by centuries of wind. A patch of soot told her someone had made camp recently. Stones arranged in a circle, ash still soft. She knelt, touched the coals. Warm. Whoever he wasn't far. As the sun dipped and cast a gulch in amber, she took the next bend slow, rifle half raised. Then she saw him. The stranger, Elias, stood in the hollow below, scanning the horizon with a long rifle resting against a shoulder. He turned the moment she stepped from behind the rock, their eyes meeting like steel on steel. Her finger tightened on the trigger. "You move, I shoot." He didn't move, just studied her like she was a ghost that had chosen to walk beside him. Cora exhaled. "You're the one who said you'd get my horse." "You're the widow," he said flatly. She lowered the barrel slightly. "I tracked you here." "You shouldn't have." "I did anyway." Elias tilted his head. "This is a hunt, not a rescue. You following me'll get us both killed." She slid down the rock and stepped closer, face hard as flint. "They took my horse. I aimed to ride her home, or die beside her." He stared at her a long while. Something behind his eyes softened. Not pity, not approval. Just recognition. He nodded once. They rode together in silence. That night, they made camp beneath an overhang of stone shaped like a whale's jaw. The wind shifted down from the rim in slow gusts, carrying the smell of creosote and old ash. The fire was small, just enough to boil coffee. Elias sat with his rifle across his knees, watching the dark, the light licking at the edge of his worn boots. Cora sipped from a tin cup, eyes on the stars. "You always ride alone." "Easier," he said. "Easier don't mean better." He didn't reply. She tossed a twig into the fire. "You were a ranger once." "I was." "What happened?" He rubbed his thumb over the stock of his rifle, gazed still in the dark. "Raiders hit a farm on the Pecos. We got there too late. My daughter." He swallowed once. "She was inside." Cora didn't speak for a moment. Then, "I'm sorry." He nodded. "After that, I stopped wearing the star. Figured justice don't live in a badge anymore." Maybe it never did. He finally looked at her. "And you? That husband of yours?" She nodded. "Levi Bell. Ranched that land since we were both 16. He didn't like to bend. That's what got him killed. Blood River tried to shake him down for money. He told them to burn in hell." Elias stirred the fire with a stick. "Sounds like a man worth mourning." He was. "But mourning don't bring a horse back." "No," Elias said softly. "It don't." They sat without words for a long time, the fire throwing thin shadows up the rock wall. Cora finally spoke again. "You really think we can find them?" "I already have," Elias said. "Now I'm making sure they know it." She watched him carefully. One man against a gang. Not the first time. She looked away, then back. "You have a plan?" He allowed the smallest hint of a smile. "You'll see." She wrapped her shawl tighter and leaned back against her saddle. "If I die out here," she said quietly, "bury me next to Junebug." "You ain't gonna die," he said without looking up. "How do you know?" "Because," Elias muttered, setting the rifle beside him as he settled in. "You're too damn stubborn." Cora closed her eyes, the faintest ghost of a smile tracing her lips. Tomorrow they would ride into fire, but tonight, beneath the canyon stars, they rested like two stones, waiting on a river to rise. The canyon walls closed in tighter the deeper they rode, sunlight flickering like a blade between the ridgelines. Elias led, his rifle resting across the saddle horn, eyes always searching. Cora followed, her expression flat and unreadable beneath her hat's brim. Every hoofbeat echoed like thunder through stone corridors. Somewhere ahead, the Blood River gang was starting to sweat. They struck the first one near Devil's Gate, a narrow bend in the rock that bottlenecked into a dead-end canyon. Elias had spotted the scout riding alone, maybe out to piss or stretch his legs. He circled back, laid the bait, half a sack of oats, Junebug's halter left dangling on a tree limb, and crouched with his rifle tucked behind a stone. The outlaw dismounted, curiosity outweighing caution. When he reached for the halter, the earth beneath him shifted. His boot hit a tripwire, and a branch loaded with rocks snapped forward, cracking his head hard enough to drop him. Before he could cry out, Elias was on him, binding his wrists and dragging him back into the shadows. They left him tied upright against a tree at the canyon mouth, arms spread wide, with a sign nailed into his chest. "This is one." The next night, Elias and Cora lit 3 small fires in a wide triangle, the smoke rising slow and deliberate into the clear, dark sky. The gang saw it from their perch and sent 2 riders to investigate. One of them, twitchy-eyed and half-drunk, never saw the edge of the ravine until his horse stopped cold, and he didn't. His body tumbled 30 feet down, bouncing off rocks with a sound that would haunt Cora for nights. The other rider turned to flee, only to catch a rope at neck height that yanked him clean off the saddle. Cora stood above him with her rifle, barrel steady, but hands trembling. The man stared up at her, defiant. "What are you?" he spat. She didn't answer. Her finger hesitated on the trigger. The man lunged. Elias's shot came from the ridge. The outlaw jerked once, then slumped at her feet. Cora dropped her rifle. Her legs buckled, and she fell to her knees, choking on air she couldn't catch. Elias was beside her a moment later. He didn't speak, just knelt and placed one hand gently on her shoulder. "I wasn't ready," she whispered. "No one ever is," he said. The gang began to fracture. Cord Wilkes sat by a dying fire, eyes bloodshot, pistol resting in his lap like a sleeping dog. The men whispered when they thought he couldn't hear, about ghosts, about something stalking them, one by one, about the noose tied in the tree above their last camp, the way the wind made it sway. Wilkes spit into the dirt. "It's just a man," he said, "and men bleed." But even he couldn't sleep. He barked orders, had the men take shifts walking the perimeter. Twice he raised his gun at his own men when they startled him in the dark. Then one morning they woke to find Dutch, a quiet one, their cook, hanging upside down from a cedar tree. A note pinned to his chest read, ** Justice rides. Sleep light, *. Wilkes tore it free and threw it into the fire, his jaw tight enough to crack teeth. "No more running," he told them. "We kill them or we don't leave this canyon." But he had only 3 men left now. One of them, a nervous boy named Jesse, vanished after taking first watch. Wilkes found his bedroll cold and the tether line cut. That was when Elias made his move. He and Cora slipped through the high trails, moving like shadows. They struck the supply mule, driving it off with gunshots, forcing the outlaws to ration what little food remained. They howled in the night, howls that belonged more to hunted things than hunters. Elias left another body, staked in the sand near their last camp. No note this time, just a boot stuffed in the mouth. Wilkes finally snapped. He and the last 2, Riggs and Carter, abandoned the high ground and fled deeper into the canyons, toward the labyrinth of box canyons and cliff dwellings, known only to old scouts and desperate men. Elias watched them from a rise, his rifle resting calmly in the crook of his elbow. "We let one go," he said. Cora looked over. "What?" "One of them runs. Takes a message." She didn't like it. He could tell, but she nodded. There was something different in her now. She hadn't spoken much since that night she nearly died. Her face was quieter, not colder, but resolved, like she had finally made peace with the cost. They tracked the gang for hours, then staged an ambush in a narrow canyon neck. Elias waited with his rifle at the high edge. When the 3 men rode in, tense and sweating, he fired once. Carter dropped from the saddle. Riggs dismounted in panic, hands raised. The mule spooked and bolted. Wilkes fired wildly into the rock walls, screaming curses. Bullets chipped stone near Elias's cover, but never found him. Then Wilkes turned and ran. Elias stood and called down to Riggs, who was still shaking on the ground. "You run," he said. "You find your boss. Tell him this ends tonight." Riggs nodded like a broken man and stumbled away into the maze of stone. That night, they made a low camp near the pass. The storm rolled in slow, black clouds unfurling like cavalry banners above the canyon rim. Lightning flickered behind the clouds, silent but close. Cora sat wrapped in her blanket, staring into the fire. Her rifle lay across her knees. Her hands had stopped trembling. Elias sat beside her, silent. She turned to him, eyes catching the firelight. I want to see his face when it ends. Elias didn't smile, but he met her gaze, and his voice was steady. You will. The canyon held its breath. Even the wind dared not stir. Just before dawn, the dark began to peel back in thin, gray layers. Elias lay on his belly atop the ridge, rifle braced, eyes fixed on the faint glow of Cord Wilkes's final camp. Below, two figures moved like restless dogs near a dying fire. One stood to piss, the other paced with his pistol drawn, lips moving, prayers or curses. Elias couldn't tell. Beside him, Cora knelt low, her breath steady, the barrel of her rifle resting on a stone shelf. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. She found her mark through the stillness, like she'd been born for it. He nodded once. Her shot cracked through the morning, flat and thunderless, like a door slamming in a house long abandoned. One of the lieutenants jerked sideways and hit the dirt without a sound. A clean shot, right through the heart. Cora didn't react, just loaded again, methodical as rainfall. The camp exploded into movement. Wilkes scrambled for cover, dragging the last man behind a broken wall of stone. Gunfire sparked from below, echoing off the canyon walls like war drums. Elias rose to a crouch and moved downhill, sliding between brush and stone, covering ground with practiced ease. Cora stayed above, watching his flank. The firelight lit nothing now but dust and fear. He reached the canyon floor in silence, pistol drawn. Cord's last man, Riggs, or what was left of him, jumped out with a scream and a wild shot. Elias didn't hesitate. One round, clean through the chest. The man folded like cloth. Then it was just Wilkes. He rose slowly from behind the rocks, blood seeping from a gash on his cheek, eyes wild. You think you're justice, he spat, gun trembling in his hand. You ain't justice. You're just another ghost in a world full of am. Elias said nothing. He stepped closer. Cord fired first. The round caught Elias in the thigh, hard enough to drop him to one knee, but not enough to stop him. Elias's return shot struck Wilkes's pistol from his hand, sending it skidding into the dust. They charged each other like bulls. The two men collided hard, fists cracking against flesh, blood smearing across weathered coats. Cord was stronger, but Elias was colder, quieter, the kind of quiet that buried people. The fight dragged through dirt and rock, over sharp stones and spent shells. Wilkes slammed Elias against a boulder, hand at his throat. Should have stayed buried, he growled. Elias drove his knee upward, catching Cord in the gut, then slammed him to the ground. He straddled him, fist raised. Stop! Cora's voice cut through the rising sun, like steel drawn from a sheath. She stood a few feet away, rifle lowered but not forgotten, her eyes fierce. Alive! Elias looked down at Cord, chest heaving, blood trickling from his mouth. Cora stepped forward and knelt. Her fingers moved with resolve as she pulled a length of rope from her saddlebag and bound Wilkes's wrists tight. She tied the knots herself, tight and unforgiving. Then she stood and looked at Elias. He nodded once. They didn't bury the bodies. They left them for the scavengers. Junebug was found tied beneath an overhang just beyond the camp, eyes wide but unharmed. Cora approached slowly, whispering her name like a prayer. The mare snorted and stepped into her arms. No rope could break what they'd built. Cora rode. Elias walked. He dragged Cord Wilkes behind him, wrists bound, boots scraping the canyon floor with every painful step. His wound bled steady, but he never faltered. It took the better part of a day to reach Dry Cedar. By the time they reached the edge of town, the wind had begun to pick up, curling dust across the main road like ghost smoke. Children stopped their games. Shopkeepers leaned out from their doorways. A rancher dropped his feed sack and stared as the three of them, woman, man, and bound killer, moved through the town like a tale come to life. Cora rode tall, rifle slung across her back, Junebug shining beneath her. Elias limped, blood crusted down his leg, but his grip never loosened on the rope. They stopped in front of the sheriff's office. Sheriff Tilson stepped out, jaw already shaking before a word was spoken. Elias stared at him for a long moment, then unhooked Cord's gun belt from his side and tossed it at the sheriff's feet. Blood River's done, he said. Tilson looked at the bound man, wide-eyed. That's Cord Wilkes. Elias said nothing. The sheriff swallowed. Who are you? The wind tugged at Elias's coat. No one anymore, he said. Then he turned and walked. By the time anyone thought to follow, he was already dust in the distance. Cora watched him go. She didn't try to stop him. Legends didn't need towns. They just needed to be true enough to whisper. That night, thunder rolled over Dry Cedar. Years passed. Children born after the blood had dried grew up with stories on their tongues. Stories of a widow who tracked down killers. A woman who rode her horse through canyon storms and came back with her chin high and her rifle clean. And the man, quiet, gray-eyed, carved out of silence, who hunted like a shadow and never gave his name. They say the wind still carries it. If you listen just right, justice rides. Sleep light.